I took off my suit jacket, and I was prepared to defend the House floor from the mob. At the same time, after he'd gone around the country lying about the election, after he'd been the architect of the attempt to overthrow that election, when that mob came, Senator Cruz was hiding in a supply closet. And that's okay. I don't want him to get hurt by the mob. I really don't. This election is his accountability. You cannot just be patriotic when your side wins. If for the first time in 250 years, this project of ours, this shared American project, that we did not have a peaceful transfer of power, the folks responsible have to be held accountable. That's why Liz Cheney has endorsed me, has got involved in this campaign, and is saying to Texans everywhere, do not put Ted Cruz back in a position of authority, because he's done it once, he'll do it again.
Hi, I'm Ana Marie Cox. This is 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. There are 19 days until the election. This is a show where we talk to smart people about what they are thinking about, obsessing about, seeing in this wild, unprecedented, sure, topsy-turvy, mind-breaking election. And today's smart person is Kevin Cruz. He is a professor of American history at Princeton University and the author of, most recently, Myth America, now out in paperback. Kevin, I'm never going to forgive you for making me say that.
It's its own reward every time. I love it. Great to be here again.
It's good to have you back. So, what's on your mind?
I mean, there's a lot going on right now. If you haven't noticed, I guess we could talk about this presidential campaign that's going on. That seems to be in the news.
We could talk about Ted Cruz and Colin Allred if we want to feel...
Oh, my God. Yeah. Now I didn't get to watch the whole thing, but I saw a bunch of clips on social media, and as someone said on Blue Sky, is what Colin Allred did to Ted Cruz legal in that state? I mean, he destroyed him, and it was and you know, you could just the side by side of them, you know, Colin Allred. You know, there's something to the visuals and the debate. You know, we've done this ever since the Kennedy Nixon stories. But look at the two of them side by side. Colin Allred, you know, a big, handsome man, but also clean cut, looking professional. Ted Cruz looks like something you got out of a shower drain that had been clogged, just really looking horrible and withering in the moment.
You know, Ted Cruz looks a little bit like someone you wouldn't like hanging out near a children's school.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah. He looks a little sketchy.
Look, I believe in several states.
Actually, that's the thing. He looks sketchy and nervous. Like he's not sure.
He's sweaty.
Yeah, he's sweaty. And Colin Allred is a former Baylor University quarterback. Like,
yeah.
He's got composure.
That the beard Ted Cruz has is probable cause in 4 states. It's really it's a cautionary sign, and the police, I think, are right to look out for people like that.
Well, you know, they legislate against. They legislate against facial hair and weird hair in general in Texas. So, just saying,
it's something.
Well, people haven't seen it. What's the stuff that you saw that?
I thought he did a decent job of. Cruz has gone all in, as many of the Republicans have, in a sign of desperation with this anti-trans panic stuff. The Trump campaign is flooding the airways with these ads. As you know, Ted Cruz had this creepy ad with a giant linebacker tackling a little girl, because that's what Democrats want. And Allred, I think, brushed that off pretty well with the line that he wants you thinking about children in bathrooms, because you don't want you thinking about women in hospital wards. I thought that was a really a savage line. And also that Ted Cruz calls himself pro-life. He doesn't care about the life of women when he's talking about that. The most effective one, though, was that prolonged answer he had on January 6th, where he just set it up at the start about you can't be, you know, for the mob on January 6th and for democracy afterwards. And Ted Cruz let out his usual kind of sniveling little chuckle, and Allred just stuffed him in the locker and said, this is not a laughing matter, and kept on and had a devastating response, talking about how Allred was texting his family, goodbye, as Ted Cruz was hiding in a supply closet. And Ted Cruz objected to that, said it didn't happen. That comes from Ted Cruz's own book. He wrote about this. So either Ted Cruz was lying then or lying now, but he wrote when he was in the supply closet on January 6th as Allred was on the floor, facing down this mob outside. So it was, I thought, Ted Cruz has been kind of the white whale, no pun intended, of Democratic politics for a long time. People keep hoping someone's going to rise up and beat him. I've had written this race off like any other kind of Texas statewide race as kind of a pipe dream of social media. But having watched Allred's performance, I think it actually could be possible. So keep hope alive. If nothing else, we got to see Ted Cruz almost cry on camera, which was delightful.
I will say that friend of the pod, Beto O'Rourke, walked so Colin Allred could run.
Yeah.
I don't think that Allred would be doing the job he's doing now if Beto hadn't had the success and the attention and the body blows to Ted Cruz that he did. I also think, and this is really tragic, I think Beto would have done better had the laws, regulating women's bodies been more strict in Texas than they are now.
Yeah.
Because that has activated people here in a way that I've never seen before. And it's because, and I get emotional about this, but it's just true, which is that every woman I know knows someone who has had to leave the state or get abortion drugs illegally in order to practice a fundamental human right.
Yeah.
Like,
and every man does as well, whether they know it or not. They do know someone. Yeah.
That's really true. And I've been fortunate to not know personally anyone that's really suffered. But I bet if I asked around enough, there probably been women in my extended social group who have had medical complications because of it. It's just maternal mortality is up 50%. It is it just statistically, I think, impossible not to be someone in Texas who doesn't know someone this is affected.
Yeah, and I think what the striking down of Roe with Dobbs has done, not just in Texas but across the country, is it's revealed a lot of this hidden personal history, right? And these are not stories people share willingly and openly. These are not happy memories. These are deeply painful personal things, which is exactly why the government should not be involved in them, right? And so I think it took something catastrophic like the end of Roe for a lot of people to come out. We saw, Sally Field shared a story about the abortion she had pre-Roe and what that was like, right? We've seen lots of women who have kept these secrets in their lives for decades, who have finally come forth and shared them because they realized that a new generation is going to be subjected to the same horrors, right? And that's finally given them the courage to kind of come, not the courage, because that makes it sound like they were being coward, but it's forced their hand to come forward and share these deeply personal things.
Well, I would say that it is made it, I'm trying to look for the right words, because there are two reasons why a woman might not feel like sharing their abortion story. And there is a kind of a good reason. There's like the reason that it's just a normal part of healthcare. So why would you tell anybody? That's great. Like, we love that. We love the idea that it doesn't have to be a deeply personal, it's deeply personal all the time, but it doesn't have to be like this decision you struggle with. The reason why people struggle with it in the US is if it's not available, right? And that's the other reason why you might not share it. So I just want women to be able to share or not share, and to have it be hard to make that decision or not hard to make that decision, right? Like, I want to live in a world where it's just like, it is healthcare.
Yeah,
it's just fucking healthcare.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't necessarily tell people about your flu shot,
Right.
And I know there are some people that get really uncomfortable around that, but I'm sorry, I don't have to tell you about anything that happens in my body, whether it's uncomfortable for me or not. And we've lost that.
People maybe get uncomfortable talking about a colonoscopy, right?
Yeah.
It's not really, dinner conversation usually, but It's an important part of healthcare, and it's what we all recognize, and it should be that normal. It should be that routine.
And the other thing is that I'm just going to use the colonoscopy like metaphor for a second, which is if colonoscopies were illegal.
Oh yeah.
Like people would be like, I don't know, should I get one or not? Do I like risk the chance that like something might go wrong because it's illegal and I have to get a back alley
colonoscopy, right?
Like it's just a thing. It's just a thing. Okay. I would love to continue to talk about Texas, especially, although I think we could probably, if we're going to talk about reproductive care, I mean, we can really expand it to the nation, right? Because it has activated a lot of people.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to point out in terms of expanding the conversations, but really talking about the same thing, is that control of people's bodies is an aspect of fascism.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and this is what's on my mind. I'm a political historian, and I'm somebody who and I've worked on conservatism. Most of my work is on that. My first book was on segregationist and racial conservatism in Atlanta. Second book on religious nationalist nationwide. Wrote a book with a colleague, Julian Zelzer, on American history since Watergate, all about kind of the radicalization of the right. So I've written about this stuff for my entire career. And I've always sort of rolled my eyes at amateur pundits who've thrown the term fascism at somewhat mainstream or even to the right, but still within the bounds of democracy conservatives, right? I've heard Ronald Reagan was a fascist and George W. Bush was a fascist. And there are points I think we could maybe argue that. It's up for debate. It's not up for debate anymore. Donald Trump is a fascist. He checks every part of the definition. Short of actually coming out in a brown suit with a swastika on and a little mustache, we're not going to get much closer than this, right? It is a populist movement that plays to the victimization mentality of its supporters. It tells people there are huge problems out there and they are the fault of a certain minority. It targets that minority. It uses the threat of government power to do so. It targets critics. It calls out the press as fake news. It does all of these things, right? Checking the box after box after box. And we've even had, the scholars have all agreed on this, right? I think not all, we never agree on everything, but there's really been a general consensus that Trump does check all these boxes. If you talk to historians of politics, if you talk to political scientists, we all agree. If you talk to Trump's own people, they agree he's a fascist. For General Mark Milley, Trump's former top general, to come out and directly declare that Donald Trump is a fascist is something that should have been screaming front page headlines in every newspaper in America, right? For some reason, the only people who cannot clearly describe this moment are the reporters and their bosses at these newspapers, I suppose, who are supposed to be clearly describing this moment for us. And so the kind of weird obfuscations, and here I'm thinking about the New York Times and to a lesser degree, some of the people in the Washington Post have gone through to bend over backwards to make their headlines as vague and uninformative as possible when they should be cutting to the truth as clearly and as compelling as the moment demands. They are instead watering this down, right? They are diluting this. And so it's not, they had one the other day. There's a social media accounts that track editing the Gray Lady, that track their headline changes. They had one where Harris was on with Charlemagne the God, and he asked, can't we just call him fascist? And she said, yeah. That was originally the headline. Harris agrees Trump is a fascist. They changed it down to Harris has something like a spirited conversation on Charlemagne the God. It's so bizarre, given all we know about media headlines and the idea of clickbait, that you want people to be drawn into these articles. That portion of a headline is, we're told this as people who write op-eds. We do this all the time, you and me. You want a hook. You need to get people's attention here in the lead. The headline should help draw them in. Instead, they are framing this as the dullest shit imaginable. And it is amazing. It's as if they are trying to tell their readers, yeah, our reporter wrote this story, but we don't actually want you to bother to read it. You're not going to learn anything here.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent some time on the New York Times and legacy journalism on this show before, and it is, as someone who has, swam in those waters, written the op-eds, like been in those meetings. First, I want to say it's often editors.
Yeah. Oh,
like
yeah.
it is.
The reporters have no real role in those headlines. I get that entirely. Yeah.
And not just in headlines, like it's sort of like the institutional voice that you are encouraged to write in, and the both sidesism. And I think there's a lot of reporters out there that recognize the asymmetry between the two campaigns, and also recognize that their very livelihood is at risk in an administration that's openly fascist, right? I have not been on the campaign trail in this cycle. I was on the campaign trail in 2016 a lot, and I think just like one or two rallies in 2020. And it is a traumatic experience as a journalist to be at a Trump rally. Like, I don't know why people don't cover that more. We talked to Sam Sanders on this show about it and how he had real trauma, especially as a Black reporter going to those rallies. And that when Trump was elected, it was a real, I guess I'll use the word mindfuck, like to walk around in the world and be like, these people that I am seeing, these white people that I am seeing probably voted for a person that thinks as a gay Black man, I am other, right? And I'll just say, the only time in my life I have felt personally threatened with violence because of my job is at a Trump rally. I had an interaction with a Trump supporter that I won't get into right now, but like he threatened to follow me home. Like, it was bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't like what I was doing and threatened to follow me home. And I think that those people understand the level of threat. I think there is maybe something that's going on that and this is just a human response to trauma, is to minimize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, especially if it's happening over and over and over again.
Yeah. And there's also, I think, a trend in kind of media punditry of trying to downplay the overreaction, right? It's if you overreact, you clearly aren't savvy. You don't know what's going on. You're being emotional. Calm down, right? And so I think there's that instinct of, well, we've all seen this before. This is just, let's treat it like normal politics. There's a certain mindset to pundits that there are categories of politics that have been known to man for forever that simply don't apply in America, right? Fascists.
What we think that we think don't apply.
That we think, right? Right. And this, I mean, the classic Sinclair Lewis novel about fascism was, it can't happen here, right?
Right.
And that's the attitude I think a lot of American pundits have of dictatorship, military purges, these kinds of mass things. That doesn't happen in America. Therefore, if we think Donald Trump is doing that thing, it's not really happening. He's just talking about it. He's not going to follow through on it. The institutions will hold, right? This isn't going to really happen. And so, yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. But the savvy people like us, we know better, and let's downplay it, right? I think that's a huge mistake. It assumes all sorts of guardrails will be in place when, if there's any lesson in the first Trump administration, is that the guardrails don't hold, right? A lot of our, and this is to some credit, the beauty of the American system, well, a lot of it was informal. We had certain norms and expectations that you wouldn't do these certain things. Yes, a lot of things were written down in the law, but there are also certain expectations that certain things were beyond the pale, kind of a gentleman's agreement in the old-fashioned term that we weren't going to do certain things. Trump blew past a lot of those. And what we saw very quickly were the people who were supposed to hold him accountable kept passing the buck. Someone else is going to do this. Someone else is going to do this. And the only people who were really effective in stopping him were people he'd hired himself to give his administration some plausible veneer of respectability, who were not themselves part of the MAGA cult, who then put the brakes on some of his things. When he told his defense secretary, can't we just shoot these protesters? He said no. When he talked to Milley about deploying the military against protesters and things like that, they said no. They found a way to stop it. And so the one lesson Trump has learned is that was the only thing stopping him. So the key part of this new administration and the key whole purpose of Project 2025, we should remember, is not just to lay out a blueprint for what Trump will do. And again, a blueprint we should all be reading in detail, but a cast of characters who will do it, right? And so don't have these people inside the movement, inside the administration who are going to pump the brake, but rather ones who move aside and let Trump do his worst instincts.
I have two thoughts. One is sort of flipping around a Bruce Sterling quote, which is "the future is here, it's just unequally distributed," which is "the dystopia is here, it's just unequally distributed," which is to say there are plenty of people in America who lived under fascism, right? There are plenty of people who have, when we talk about, I get a little annoyed, like on Blue Sky or social media, when people are like, he's going to round us up into camps. People in America have been rounded up into camps. Like, we've had camps. Just haven't been for sort of what we consider now like a mainstream leftist political dissident, and it hasn't been like middle-class white people for the most part that have been rounded up into camps, but people get rounded up into camps. And then the other thought that I have, and this was not one we need to pursue very hard, is those pundits that kind of sane wash and dismiss some of these things. I want to send them personally to Trump rallies. Like, I want them to be on the ground at a rally, both to see Trump's cognitive decline, which is becoming more and more obvious, and to experience the 2-minute hate that happens when he points out that the press is here. And it is because it's visceral. It is a visceral targeting.
And I will say, I've been heartened in the last couple of days by some changes that I've seen both in the Harris campaign and in media coverage, which is they've found a way around the sane washing by just showing the evidence themselves, right? This is how I teach, right? When I teach, when people know my kind of political views, and I don't want to get up there and just kind of give you my perspective and you have to take it as wisdom if you're my student. I like to show people the primary evidence, right? And so I'll show a clip. When I teach George Wallace, I show Wallace rallies. When I teach some of these other people, I show Joe McCarthy. I present the text of what they've done. So we've seen Kamala Harris at her rallies, I think very smartly, is now showing clips of Trump at his rallies, right? To say, again, part of their entire genius of this campaign has been working around some of those bad kind of media gatekeepers. And they've done that. And then in doing that, they then force the media to show the clips of the clips, right? And then also Philip Bump of the Washington Post did a great piece yesterday where Trump was asked a question at the Chicago Economic Forum by the managing editor of Bloomberg. And what Phil did was just present the entire answer, right, with some footnotes to correct where it went wrong, just to say, again, I think the problem a lot of reporters have is their job is to make sense of a problem, to make sense of a situation. So they get these garbled Trump quotes and they try to find a germ or a pull quote that they can get out of that to make sense of it. The point is that you shouldn't be doing that. And I think what Philip did in this piece was great because he just said, here's his answer on inflation. And it rambles off into a million different subjects. And just to present that in full, right? And so to force people, I've always said, I think you shouldn't be allowed to vote for Trump unless you read one of his speeches out loud before you go to the voting booth and say, yes, that's what I want.
Yeah, so I consume a lot of right-wing media. To be honest, I find it more interesting than mainstream media. And it's a little know thy enemy. And I think it keeps me, consuming right-wing media keeps me in reality in some ways because I see what it is half of the country or almost half of the country is consuming. And I was listening to a show this morning that played clips from the Chicago interview, which you and I have heard. And he is you can see or hear the cognitive decline. He doesn't make sense. His answers are incoherent. And I don't mean that in a traditional incoherent that we have seen in past elections. He stumbles over ideas. He uses the wrong words. It is the same thing that we saw in Biden at the debate that caused Biden to step down from the ticket.
Right.
It is the exact same kind of thing. The big difference between them is Trump speaks more confidently.
Yeah.
And the thing about watching that as a person who sees most of it and who was kind of looking for the missing pieces, looking for or the fascism and the nonsense, is we don't look for the sense, which is what they do on the right. And they look for the pieces that validate their worldview. So the part that I heard on this right-wing show this morning was the part where Trump pushed back and said something like, well, the Wall Street Journal has been wrong for years. It was a very short thing. And then he also pushed back on Micklethwaite saying, like, what do you know? You've been wrong for years. And in isolation, those two bits sound like Trump fighting back. Sound like Trump just being belligerent against that MSM.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess part of me is saying, like, I feel there is part of the country that is lost.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry to be depressing. Part of the country is gone. And part of the country is, I mean, not for good, I hope. But at this moment, they've wandered off into a media ecosystem that is completely sealed off, that is divorced from reality and presenting an alternate vision. What I think is remarkable, though, about this moment, or maybe not remarkable, but I think important about this moment, is that, as you noted, Trump himself has gotten pretty hard to sane wash, right? And so the kind of routine things that people were polishing up before, it's hard to put a good spin on Trump standing on stage for 39 minutes, awkwardly gyrating to Ave Maria, right? In his little jazz hands dance. It's hard to say that, I mean, there's a certain point at which even the most deluded members of the cult are going to have to go, what? Then, they've been defending and rationalizing a lot, and many of them are still deep in it. I'm not saying they're going to have a come to Jesus moment here in the end, the true believers, but there are a lot of people on the sidelines still. And I know this is hard to believe, people like you and me, and people who listen to a podcast like this. There are people who are still trying to make up their minds, and God help us, the election kind of depends on them. And so they're tuning into this moment, and they're going to see, again, the Donald Trump dance show, or one of these call-ins he does, or even when he gets these seemingly favorable clips on Fox, he comes off a lot worse than I think they remember. He looks like hell. He's now gone basically blackface with the makeup. He's rambling, he's slurring, and I think he's worse than Biden was in the debate. Biden had certain mental slips, but Trump can't pronounce Arizonans, right? He's having trouble with some basic words that he just can't wrap his head around. And he keeps talking about how he's got the weave, right? But he's got some magical speaking style. It's rambling. It's nonsense. He's all over the place. He can't answer a question, right? And we're finally starting to see a couple people like Micklethwaite push back on that rambling rather than trying to kind of pick him up off the ground like he's a toddler they're rooting for,
So I want to dig into some of the history here and see if there's some lessons we can learn. What comes to mind for me is one that, I don't know, I guess it's a good one, or something that can give a little bit of a path that's more hopeful or more positive, which is I think about George Wallace. And I was writing a piece, I may still publish somewhere, about the assassination attempt on Trump and the ways that we can think about it and look at it. And to me, there's three. One is the raised fist, which is the one that's been adopted by the right. And it's so iconic. It's almost unbelievable, right? It is the thing when I see it, when I saw it in real time, I was like, it feels staged. Like there's a party that goes to like, that's just not the person I think he is. It seems so choreographed. And also he's such a coward. Like it's odd. And then there's another picture, which Pete Souza, former White House photographer for Obama, said was his image, which is the one of the Secret Service agents piling on top of him. And it's very close up. And there's this like very well formed triangle. Like it's just formally very beautiful. And there's a female agent at the very top. Really striking picture. But the image that I think about is not directly related to the assassination. It's the one from the convention where it's a sea of deportation, mass deportation now signs. And it's a really striking image because there's no people visible. It's just signs. And also like in isolation like that, the fact that it's now and the fact that it's not, they don't say who. I mean, we all kind of know what they mean, but I think there's something really significant about turning it into just deportation, because that could be anybody. And that brings me to George Wallace, because we don't remember his assassination. Like you're kind of, I mean, you and I know, people who kind of study American history know, but he has gone down in the history books as just a fucking racist, right? And so my hope is that that's how we remember Trump. And I think that is a thing that could happen if he loses. And I want to know if you think, as a historian, like, I mean, maybe we shouldn't forget that history. Maybe we shouldn't forget George Wallace. But like, do Americans come back from this stuff? It's never gotten as far as it is now, but
yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, let me talk about a couple of people here. What Wallace is a good example, but I think we got to go back to Huey Long as the first one. Winston Clare Lewis wrote It Can't Happen Here. It's a book in 1935. The main character, Lewis is great at everything except the character names. The main character named Buzz Windrip was a thinly disguised version of Huey Long, right? Who becomes the American fascist president. And Long's career was one, again, checked all these boxes, a very kind of populist, folksy embrace, but presented his people as victims, in his case, victimized by the banks, by big business. They needed to trust into a messianic leader who could save them. Or Huey Long is introduced to one rally in Philadelphia, in Iowa, as the savior whom God in his goodness has vouchsafed for his children. I mean, they're messianic terms here, right? And Wallace was the same way. He had this visceral appeal to people who thought of themselves as overlooked, as forgotten, as the victims, increasingly in a 1960s culture that they thought was starting to cater to racial minorities or women or leftists, things like that. They felt left out. Wallace, in the words of the Pete Wallace profile, was their avenging angel, right? Again, sent by God to build them up. Trump has tapped into that same thing. And what we have to remember about this kind of fascist politics, and all of these check those boxes in a lot of ways, is that in the ratcheting up of violence, in making it less about a politics of civility and more about a politics of extinction, right? Of talking about your enemies not as the good gentleman over there, but as a vermin, as the enemy within, as scum who need to be eradicated, who need to be deported, who need to be taken out in one form or another. That sort of ratcheted up violence that you're encouraging in your movement, and the sense of suffocation that there are no good options out there, it inevitably leads to violence that you cannot control. And once that is unleashed into the public, once that gets out there, you start to see it come back to them. So Huey Long, his secret police, his bodyguards roughed up people all the time. And then in 1935, the son of one of the people he'd roughed up, Dr. Carl Austin Weiss, shot him, killed Huey Long. And Huey Long was the only thing he said between being shot and when he died in the hospital. They forgot to check on his kidney for a bullet wound. The only thing he said was, I wonder what they shot me for. There have been a lot of reasons. He made a lot of enemies along the way. George Wallace at his rallies, known for violence, people throwing chairs. He would get, just like a Trump rally, he would single out the people, the press, the liberals in the audience, get his people riled up. They would fight. if you look at a montage of George Wallace rallies, it's a great American experience documentary. It's all about fighting. There are people throwing fists, throwing chairs, getting violent. Wallace loved this until 1972. Somebody puts a bullet in him, puts him into a wheelchair. Donald Trump, the same thing. He's been encouraging violence. He's been pushing him out there. And it's not surprising that what has happened is that 2 Republicans apparently have taken shots at him, right? And so this is the danger of fascism that the fascists themselves don't realize, is that it opens up a set of political dynamics in which the chickens often come home to roost, right? They often think that they are in charge of this, that they're riding the tiger, right? And the tiger inevitably turns on them. So this is not a wish, not a hope, but just what we've seen historically is that this stuff gets out of hand and they can't control it. They think they can.
A historical point, which is that the guy that shot Wallace was not politically motivated, right? Like the guy that shot Wallace was looking for fame. And I think that is true.
Arthur Bremer. In that case, he fits like the Trump guys, right?
Yeah.
The first Trump assassination attempt was apparently thinking, he was looking at Biden. He was looking at Trump. He just wanted to get some claim to fame, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing was true with Arthur Bremer. He was maybe going to take a shot at Nixon, maybe going to take a shot at McGovern, maybe. Finally settled on Wallace as the convenient one.
Yeah.
But it's that, again, that atmosphere of violence stirs up this thing and they're just looking for a way out.
Right. And I do agree. And something we've said on this show before is the thing about fascism and division and oppression is that it always ultimately leads to violence. Always. And I agree. It can stem from both sides. And we can talk about like a righteousness, maybe. And I do think there's often a side that is, I don't know if I want to use the word righteous, but there's often a side that feels, and I do think not just feels, I'm going to say, like, I am a fan of the Civil War in a sense, right? Like, I think, yeah, like that had to happen. It was over slavery, and I don't know how else it could have gone. But, it is something that comes from escalation, right? It has a starting point that's not, we all have to shoot each other. And that starting point, in our Civil War, that starting point was not, it was from violence, protection of the right to own slaves. That is where that started. It does escalate on both sides. That escalation means, right? And I'm just, have you seen Civil War? The movie Civil War?
No, I haven't yet. I haven't.
Okay. Most people would probably find it pretty upsetting. It's supposed to be upsetting.
Right.
And I have seen it 3 times. and there's a lot of reasons for that. I started a Substack that's just about it. But one of the things I think is really powerful in it is that it is not I don't believe that it is a pro-war movie. I think in some ways it is an anti-war movie. In some ways it is, or an anti-pro-war movie. It is what to me the movie does that's really successful and important is point out that once you unleash war, there are going to be moral compromises on all sides. Once you unleash violence at that level, the good guys are no longer necessarily going to behave like good guys. There is a side that we can see as more righteous or as fighting on a side that we agree with more. But there were war crimes committed in our Civil War by the side that we might consider good guys, by the side that we are at. Put it this way, I'm glad the North won. No, glad they won. Did they commit war crimes? Yes.
What people misunderstand when that Sherman quote, "War is hell," isn't, oh, war's awful. It's war has to be awful. Make life hell for your enemy, right?
Yeah.
And not just the soldiers, but the civilians too. War should be hell was what he meant. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know. I think that the more we can remain conscious of the fact that violence will require us to morally compromise ourselves if we participate in it, I think the better.
Yeah.
And perhaps I just hope, I mean, I don't think anybody listening to this podcast doesn't realize the urgency of the moment, but
No, but let me just, well, they may realize it, but let me just underscore that, right? You talked about escalation. There's an opportunity for an off ramp here, right? And I think that's why you've seen, my God, everyone from Dick Cheney to Angela Davis has come together and saying, whatever our political disputes, otherwise, in this moment, we're backing the Democratic ticket because it's the only option within the bounds of the democracy in which we can have a civil debate, in which Dick Cheney and Angela Davis could get on stage together and not agree on a damn thing, but do it without coming to blows, do it without one of them winding up in jail, right? That's a society, I think, that we've seen. And I could not disagree more with Dick Cheney. And on some things I disagree with Angela Davis. But they are within this camp of saying, this is who America is. This is what America is defined by, a civil set of debates. They fall short of civil war, right? And we've got an opportunity here to take an off-ramp here. And there are reasons so many people are on board this movement and trying to foreclose it. Because if Trump is elected again, the next steps that happen are going to be really hard to roll back. Anyone out there who is living in a fantasy world of, oh, well, 4 more years of Trump won't be so bad, and then we'll have the 2028 election, and then we'll see the leftist revolution will finally happen. Then we'll see the socialist paradise. And that's not how it works. That's not how it works. The Democratic Party isn't going to tack left under Trump. We're not going to see a real resurgence here. And we might not even have a real election the next time around, right?
I agree. We had Josh Gondelman on yesterday, and I do think what we talked about is my concern about allowing Dick Cheney on stage is I worry about young people, especially, feeling betrayed by that. I agree that those young people, I want to make the argument to them that you're making, which is if we elect Harris, we're going to get to still have those arguments. Like, there is a possibility to tack left. There is a possibility to expand rights and to expand our social safety net if we elect a Democratic Party that will allow Cheney on stage. I think the guy's a fucking war criminal, but okay, I understand why you're doing that. I mean, my concern is more like, I guess it's like it is a punditry, horse racy concern, which is, I worry a lot about young people in this country and how many times, for instance, there has been a popular vote that has been ignored. There are a lot of people in this country. I might be that since they've been voting, the person who wins the popular vote hasn't won. Like, how can you still have faith in democracy then? Like, and it's not, and I don't worry so much about, I don't know. What I worry about just is checking out, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
you teach the youngs.
I teach the youngs, yeah. There are two separate issues here that maybe we should talk about. One is the Cheney thing. And I can get why people would be upset that he would be allowed on stage. I don't know if he's actually been on stage, but his name has been thrown out. And so it's not that Harris is running around saying, yay, I got Dick Cheney. It's more a sign that even Dick Cheney understands this. It's like if Dick Cheney came out in favor of oxygen, that doesn't make oxygen bad, right? He recognizes that we need this shit to live, right? And so that's how I see the Dick Cheney thing, is that, Jesus Christ, it's so bad that even someone like Dick Cheney, who I would not be trusted alone in a room with from what I would do to him, even someone as bad as that gets this moment, right? And I see that as an important thing because there are a lot of Republicans who otherwise would say, I always vote the R box. Here we go. This is just, I'm on autopilot. For someone like Cheney to come out and say that, I think is useful. Again, Colin Allred, I think, used that pretty well in a debate last night. He used Liz Cheney's endorsement, I think. If Harris was saying, hey, we need to adopt Cheney's policies, that's a different matter altogether. But rather just saying, yeah, this is a big tent, and we're going to have to, in order to get that landslide that's going to overcome the second issue you talked about, the kind of the anti-democratic trends, you've got to have overwhelming numbers, right? And every successful landslide presidency we've seen in the past that has been able to do big things made an effort to win those people over, right? FDR brought large numbers of Republicans in. LBJ had an ad about this is not the Republican Party under Goldwater. Ronald Reagan famously leaned into Reagan Democrats, right? To have that kind of big splash, especially in a nation that is so close to 50-50 on partisan alignment, you've got to steal some people from the other base. So I see the Cheney thing as fine on that. If she's starting to parrot his policies, if she starts talking about, let's forgive him for waterboarding and that's a different thing. The second thing, the Electoral College, and the minority vote there is, I think, a real issue. And I think people should be pissed off about that. And I think it's only getting worse. And you can look at the demographic trends and see how the Electoral College works. And we are well on our way. We're already there with the Senate being ruled by a minority. The country more and more is going to be ruled by a minority in the Electoral College, right? And so seeing that and calling it out as a problem is, I think, a real issue. Even though Biden won by like 7 million votes last time, it still came down to a narrow margin. And we're on track for, you could have a Democrat win by 10, maybe 12 million votes in the coming election and still manage to lose because of the current Electoral College. And that's a crisis that has to be changed.
Yeah.
And I should think it's no doubt that the last time we almost changed the Electoral College was after George Wallace in 1968, when it seemed clear that there was a fascist threat and this might actually get him elected. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's hope. I've said a version of this. I saw Michael Hobbs on Blue Sky say a version of this, which is, it seems like the ideal scenario for Democrats in America is to run as somewhat moderate, bipartisan, big tenty, folks, and then to tack to a version of the, liberal progressive parties in Europe, like a Norway style, like a Northern European style social safety net and generous government benefits, because those policies are popular. Like once you put them in, people like them. Tim Walz's administration, Minnesota, is the perfect example. He ran as a moderate. He had an evolution. He was somewhat, I won't say tugged to the left. Like, I think he just saw the sense. He's a practical guy. He's a dad. He changes a carburetor, sees what's wrong, tries to fix it. He sees society, sees what's wrong, has some options, tries to fix it. And then those policies turn out to be incredibly popular. And then you can kind of run in a different way. And those policies stop being partisan. Yeah. Like, universal healthcare is not a partisan issue in many nations.
we saw this with the Affordable Care Act, right?
Right.
I mean, Obama even joked about this. They've stopped calling it Obamacare because it's now popular, right? This is why they fought it. Bill Kristol said this back in 93 when the Democrats were pushing some form of national health insurance under Clinton. Once they get this, it'll be popular. You got to kill it when it comes out. You got to frame it as something crazy. Once people get a benefit like that, they hang on to it, right?
Social fucking security, man. Like,
yeah.
And that's why, like, when I hear Harris, a genuinely revolutionary in America idea was expanding disability insurance and home health care.
Yeah. Huge. I mean,
me personally,
no, I've been through this too. And to anyone out there listening to this, if you don't think that policy will affect you, it will. It's only a matter of time.
It will change lives.
It will change lives. I cannot stress if you're out there, if you're some Gen Xer or millennial who's thinking that you're going to get some family inheritance, no, you're not. It's going to be pissed away on a futile effort to try to care for your loved one at the end of their life, right? And I think it was Nicole Chung who talked about this on Blue Sky, said she reached my, and this is a successful author. This is someone who you think would have it made, right? She said they realized at the end of her mom's life, they had enough for her to die on, but not enough for her to live on, right? And again, it is the most stressful, unbelievable time. It's not just the money, the time, the mental health, the bandwidth you've got to deal with this loved one in crisis will wreck you in every way imaginable. And if you haven't dealt with this, you're lucky because it's coming. It's either going to come for your parents or it's going to come for you, and you'll have to deal with it with your kids. And so this policy is a revolutionary one. And again, we talk about people sneer at incrementalism. Oh, yeah. All the big changes really have started out that way, right? Social Security started out small and got bigger. Medicare started out as an amendment to Social Security, got bigger, right? Still expanding these things. And that's the way in which progress changes. It's not going to magically change overnight, but occasionally with these moments of big movements, of big leaps. And that's, I think, where we could be now. Again, it's going to require running up the score, because a narrow win, you can still do a lot with a narrow win. George W. Bush squeaked in and governed hard right.
Tim Walz.
Tim Walz? That's the remarkable thing about what Walz did, what a lot of the Midwestern ones did in Minnesota and Wisconsin and in Michigan. Their majorities squeaked in and just went all out. And the policies that you noted, once they were in, were incredibly popular, right? Meanwhile, you've got, the New York Democrats with their overwhelming majority, can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. It's pathetic. But these Midwestern Democrats have, I think, really shown the way. Now, you can do it on a thin margin, but if they blow it out, it's going to be really impressive.
There's a reason I keep my Minnesota license plate. I'm a very proud Texan, but I brag every time I can that I got to vote for Tim Walz. But that's when he was the moderate. So, all right, this has been fantastic. I want to encourage people to look into that home health care benefit and the expansion of disability insurance if they haven't. It is, if you have people in your life that are not sure about voting for Harris, this might be something that you can talk about. Although I know that some people will be like, oh, there's more spending. Try.
It's more spending, but honestly, I don't even know if it is more spending. I'm not an expert on this, but the amount it costs to put someone into an assisted living facility, again, if you've not dealt with this, you will be blown away by the numbers that we're talking about here. Tens of thousands of dollars a month.
Yeah.
For
30,000, 40,000 a month.
It's crazy. 60,000. I had a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. For service you're not going to really enjoy, right? And it's much cheaper to have in-home care on a variety of ways. And so this, I think, actually could, in the long term, be a net win.
Oh, I agree that it makes sense in the long term, and that a society that's able to care for their elderly allows people who are in prime of life to earn more, to contribute more, all of that. We have got to bring this home. So is there anything else that you want to say on our way out here? Is there something that we've left on the table?
No, just to underscore, this is not, if you ever hear anyone's kind of assuming this is politics as usual, this is just a normal election. I know people, this is the most important election of my life. I keep hearing that. This is the most important election of your life. Okay. I'm an American historian. I deal with politics. I can talk about any of them in the past. This one is different. Treat it like that. Leave it all in the field. Okay.
So it's a tradition now. There's still time to register in some states. I think that some states do have 2 weeks. So look into that, check your registration. There have been a lot of purges in red states of voter rolls of people that are perfectly, eligible to vote. And so make sure that you're eligible. If you are in a state that started early voting, go bank your vote. And the real reason to do that is you will stop getting calls and texts about voting. If you need more motivation, that might be one. And also, when you have friends that seem on the fence, the most effective way to talk to someone about voting is to ask them about their plan to vote. Is to say, well, do you know, can I drive you? Like, do you need any, can I get you some more information? You may not even.
Do you know where your polling place is? What time are you going to go? Yeah, really. You can frame it just in terms of helping them out. I mean, I personally would hope that you're going to go for people that are leaning Democratic, but it's all good. It's good to vote. Good to vote. Yeah. If you feel uncomfortable talking about politics in specific, good to vote. Also, volunteering to bring them information about down ballot races would be a really helpful thing to do. Yes.
So
absolutely.
So as a reminder, this is 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. We are going to continue broadcasting after day 0. We're going to go into negative days after the election. So, whoa. And we might even continue after that. I'll call the show something different. But it is 19 days to the election. I've been talking to Kevin Cruz, professor of American history at Princeton University and author of Myth America, now out in paperback. If you were watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, you should know it is also available as a podcast. Listen as a podcast. You can watch it on YouTube. Hit the subscribe, the like, the rate, the review. Tell your friends and neighbors. And then, in addition to voting in the presidential election, would you please vote for this show in the Signal Awards, which you can do if you go to vote.signalaward.com. We are nominated in a specific category, which I believe is special or limited podcasts, and under news and politics, you'll figure it out. And
We'll
thank you. And we'll be back on Friday.
Thanks for having me.
He's our kind of man, our kind of man. George Wallace is our kind of man.
As he always puts it, he speaks for the truck driver, the beautician, the policeman, and other members of the so-called working class.
I like that man. He tells you what, he tells you the truth. That's what it is.
And it is true that the liberal, educated, academic, journalistic, professional, intellectual circles seem not much interested in the white working class.
He is not a racist. That's definite.
I'm going to vote for George Wallace because he says what I like to hear.